All right, look, I need you to look at me when I'm saying this to you. When it comes to your grief, your biggest problem isn't what you think that it is. And that's your biggest problem. All right. A problem well defined is a problem half solved. What that means is that so often the best first step to a solution is not to look for the solution, it's to spend time defining the problem so that we can ensure that everything that we're doing is really moving the ball forward. So many times, right, when it comes to illnesses or things that we have. Illnesses are not cured, not because of a lack of a cure, but because of the presence of a misdiagnosis. And when it comes to grief, part of why I've spent so much time doing so much work in this space is because what I learned after I lost my brother Sam was just how much nobody knows what to do with something that is supposed to be a universal emotion that everybody goes through at some time and we all will go through. And the only things that people know how what to do are the wrong things to do. And so I remember what it was like to sit outside of that Longhorn Steakhouse and to say the words, Sam's dead, to the five different members of my family 10 times because every time I said it, the first time they looked at me and they said, "What? What?" And I repeated it over and over and over, hoping that somebody somewhere would help me with what to do next. And I felt so alone. And that was what I found, right? People tend to think that the biggest thing with grief is the loss that you feel, but it is not the initial loss that does you in. It is the loneliness that really grips us, right? This is Dr. Mary Catherine McDonald is going to say it like this. Trauma is when your emotional pain cannot find a relational home. All right, so she's saying it's when you have all of this pain inside of you and you feel like the pain is the thing that does you in. You feel like the pain is the cinder blocks tied around your ankles that's going to cause you to drown. And you don't realize, oh, it's not the pain that pulls you under. It's the fact that you have to carry all that pain by yourself. And there's nobody else to help you with that weight. It is not the loss, it is the loneliness, right? It's like this, right? I had a friend back in the day, her house caught on fire. She called me and said, "Yo, John, my house is on fire." And she says, "But good news, the fire department is right around the corner." So I say, "That's great news. Do you need anything?" She's like, "Nah, I'm good. I'll see you at church in the morning." I walk up to her church the next day and I'm like, "Yo, such good news that the fire department got there on time." And she said, here's the thing that you learn about when your house catches on fire. One of the things that you learn is that as you walk through the smoldering remains of your apartment, you find out uh, that what the fire doesn't destroy, the water does. And I think you quickly find that out with grief, right? That what the loss doesn't destroy, it's the loneliness that does. It is realizing that everybody's going to go through this exact same thing. And when you find yourself at the lowest places in your life, you look and there's a thing inside of you, right? The expectation bubbles up inside of you that, man, I'm glad that I'm not the first person that has to go through this. And so your expectations are so high because you feel like as long as people have been living, people have been loving. And as long as people have been loving, people have been losing the things that they love. So surely somebody else knows how to get through this. And you look for people to say all of these words. And when your expectations are this high and the experience comes up this short and nobody knows what to say, and the things that everybody knows to say is the wrong thing to say, then what you find is that gap in between your expectations and your experiences is what we call discontentment. It is saying, my heart is set ablaze with this fire of grief. And the best that anybody can think to do is to splash it with a bunch of sorry for your losses, which on my worst day only reminds me that I don't have as much as you do. And on my best days, it doesn't do anything for me. And I get frustrated because you sit back and you think, like, how is it that we all know to say that phrase, even though we all know that that phrase doesn't help, right? Where did we learn it? I think we learned it from the same place that people learned bless you. And that's the crazy thing, right? That the most shared expressions when it comes to grief are the most shallow. And I think it's because we've never taken time to be fluent in grief because we've wrongly understood what grief is. And y'all are going to hear me say this until I'm blue in the face. It's crazy how my life's work has really become about death. And I think people misunderstand what to do with grief because they've misunderstood the metaphor, right? Metaphors are the things that help you and I grasp a hold of reality. And when we grasp a hold of that reality, we live as if the metaphor is the map key that tells us where to go. So a good one is helpful because it leads us in the right path. But a bad metaphor, especially with something as important as grief, is not just unhelpful, it is harmful, right? That when people tend to think of grief as a journey, and we've all heard that, right? Grief is a journey. People tend to think that grief is going to have what journeys have. Journeys have a start, check. Grief has a start, check. Journeys have an end, check. Grief has an end, absolutely not. And as time goes on, we find that when we expect grief to end and it doesn't end, that gap in between our expectations and our experience is discontentment. And when we're led to believe that grief has some earthly end, then what we quickly find out is that whoever gave us that gave us the only thing in the world that is worse than real pain, and that is false hope. They've left us waiting for a bus that is never coming, right? But what I've learned is that all right, maybe it's not helpful to think of grief as a journey. It's more helpful to think of grief as a language. And the goal of a language isn't to finish. The goal of a language is to become fluent, right? And this is it. Look, language isn't meant to solve the problem of loss. Language doesn't change the fact that we've lost, but what language does do is it changes the loneliness. It reminds us that we are not the first ones to have a particular category of pain. We are definitely unique in that we are the first ones to have this kind of a pain. There is nobody that lost Sam like I lost Sam. In that way, that pain is unique. But the category of it, it reminds us that we're not alone. And when we start to try to solve the problem of loneliness, that's when we realize, oh, this is maybe a much tougher problem to solve because one of the things that you find out is that loneliness is something that is actually more deadly than you think that it is. And when you start to go through it, you realize that we are so much more under resourced than anybody would imagine to solve this. This is what I mean, right? We live in a world and a culture that, on all fronts, is completely outgunned to deal with this thing called loneliness. This is what I mean. In 2003, the Surgeons General, or in 2023, the Surgeons General put out this report where he said the epidemic of loneliness is actually as great of a risk to your health as smoking 15 cigarettes per day. So he's saying for all of us that feel down in the dumps and in the blues and find ourselves completely isolated and plagued by this incredible loneliness, he's saying you would be healthier riding on an airplane with the chain smoking stewardess in the 50s, right? Like it is this loneliness is a health risk. It is a threat to your health, right? But it's not just that. The ways that we think to deal with loss and grief, because we don't think to deal with the loneliness part on all fronts, right? Uh, we're cooked, as the youths would say, right? Like from a work standpoint, the U.S. Department of the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the people that do all this stuff with your labor and statistics, basically say this: um, the average full-time employee only gets 3 bereavement days per year, and those are not federally mandated. So what that means is this: you clock out of work at 5 o'clock on Monday. And if your mother dies, the most important relationship to you, right? Say you lose the most important person to you, then your job would say, hey, sorry for your loss. Take all the time that you need. Just make sure that you're back by casual Fridays. And if that's not enough, even if you try to go back and deal with things, um, via mental health solely, what you find is that there is one therapist for every 350 Americans. And so it's not saying mental health is wrong or it's bad or it's insufficient. I've had the same therapist for a decade. It's just saying when it comes to trying to catch the weight of everybody's collective grief, that net is not thick enough, right? So we find ourselves seeing that, oh, there is this thing of grief, but when we take off uh, the um, the costume that it wears, we realize what we're really trying to fix is loneliness. And if you're like, man, John, I'm really feeling despondent, I've got news for you. That's not even the biggest problem, right? This is the problem. This is the tragedy, and it is best illustrated by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Uh, he has, or Samuel Coleridge Taylor. I'm not really sure uh, how it goes. He's, yeah, older white poet that wrote lots of good things, but he has this one where he says, water, water everywhere, but not a drop to drink. And he just talks about the um, heartbreaking reality, the tragedy of being stranded at sea, but dying of thirst. And what he's saying is there is a way for you to be surrounded by the very thing that you need to keep you alive, but you can't intake the thing to keep you alive because in its current form, it is not what it is that you need, that it's going to do you more harm than good. And that is what it feels like when you find yourself drowning in grief or stranded, isolated in grief in a sea of people. And you say, the only thing that I need is for somebody to be able to uh, carry this emotional pain relationally. And people are thoroughly unquipped, right? Unequipped. You spend your time saying, I need to stay away from these people because everybody that I talk to at this time makes me mad as hell. And I just want to choke and strangle people. So you run and you leave and you don't do anything about it. And you continue to be in your isolation and you see people everywhere. And there's nobody here to help. It's not a quantity problem, it is a quality problem. And that's what we've got to work through. That's what we've got to change, right? Grief is this everyday problem that everyday people face every single day. And when you have an everyday problem and assume that it needs an expert solution, uh, society doesn't heal, society halts. This is what I mean. Um, your car running out of gas, everyday problem. Your transmission of your car going out, expert problem. Your car runs out of gas, you don't need to take it to a mechanic. Your transmission goes out, you need to take it to a mechanic. Your car runs out of gas, you know how to fill it up. People that don't drive know how to fill it up. Your kids who may or may not drive because they don't like to drive nowadays, they don't know, or they know how to fill it up. And we do that because we know it is such a common problem and occurrence that we don't need to wait until somebody finds themselves there. It is such a common occurrence that we don't need to wait until somebody finds themselves there in order to equip them. We say it is something that everybody's going to have to learn at some time. Imagine what things would be like if everybody took a gasless car to a mechanic. Imagine how terrible traffic would be. Imagine how many cars would be abandoned on the side of the street. Imagine how many people would just give up driving or getting to where they need to be altogether because it is a train wreck. And that is the thing with grief. It's an everyday problem that everyday people face every single day. And we assume that this everyday problem needs an expert solution because we're not fixing the right thing. The thing that we have to address is loneliness. And the way that we do it is not by getting more people to come in, it's by saying, how do we change the quality of people everywhere in order that, regardless of where we are, when we go through the worst days of our life, we find ourselves surrounded by people that know what to do, right? Like my daughter knows how to pump gas in a car. And so if she comes up to a gas station and she sees somebody with a broken arm, she knows exactly how to step in and to help. And the hope is um, that we would get to a place where anybody who walks up and sees somebody with a broken heart because of grief knows exactly what to do and how to help. So, all right, what the sailors learned how to do was they said, we don't need to wait until it rains and pray for rainwater to drink. We've got to find a way to alchemize or to transform the water that surrounds us into something different, into something that is beneficial and good that we can intake that isn't going to um, hurt us or harm us. And I think we've got to do the same thing when it comes to people. And one of the ways that we do that is we realize that people don't change just through propositions, people don't change through advice. What you find is that the way that people change, the way that people adopt virtues and internalize them and are motivated to become something different is through beauty and story. It's not through instruction, it's through inspiration, right? This is what I mean, right? Stories are the vehicles through which virtues like move down and people adopt them. So if I'm trying to teach my daughter patience, what I've learned is I'm not going to be like, Ava, here's a peer reviewed study of the three major benefits of being patient and the six ways that you can be more patient. That's not for her. If I want her to be patient, I've got to get her to love patience. And so I say, hey, sweetheart, once upon a time, there was a tortoise and a hare. And look, as she lingers in that story, as she waits and as she enjoys, as she exhibits the very patience that I'm trying to give her, at the end of the story, there is this stories are these vaults that are like time sealed. And the only people that get the treasure in them are the people that are patient enough to wait until the end. And there's something about lingering long enough in your discomfort to see that providentially, like it's led you to a place. It is realizing that when it comes to grief, grief is very much something hard and ugly and frustrating. Uh, but if we linger long enough, grief has this, or it's this doorway that leads us into beauty, right? It's like this, right? Most people tend to avoid processing their grief for the same reason they avoid drinking their coffee black. They know that it's bitter, they dislike the bitterness. And so, in an attempt to distract themselves, what they do is they load it up with all types of sugar and cream, even though, 3 out of 4 of us are lactose intolerant. And they get to a place where they imagine themselves successful if they've numbed themselves from feeling or tasting the bitterness of grief or of coffee. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. It's late and I got to get this up so that I don't owe Natalie $50 for not putting up my YouTube video this week. Uh, but what you find is this: um, even if you distract yourself from tasting the bitterness of coffee, coffee, uh, what you learn is that coffee is not a bean. Coffee is a fruit. It is the pit of a coffee cherry, and that fruit takes on the flavor of its soil. And so, what does take place is if you linger long enough into the bitterness, you realize that there are sweetnesses on the backside that are only reserved for people that are going to drink it black and lean into it, right? Avoiding the bitterness is a problem, but it's not the biggest problem of coffee. And if you numb yourself to the point where you avoid that, then what you actually end up doing is disqualifying yourself from the real treasure that lies on the backside. Grief is the same way, right? So many of us find ourselves in these distraction experiments where we try to numb our soul with um, yeah, sex and accomplishments and achievements and all types of stuff. And we imagine ourselves successful when we no longer taste the bitterness of grief. The problem is there are these subtle sweetnesses on the back end of grief that if we would just lean in, we would realize that grief, like coffee, it is bitter, but it's not only bitter. It's bittersweet, right? That we realize that there is this great opportunity to connect humanity. There is this great window. We're at the lowest point in all of our lives, and we see very clearly the things that matter. We have a unique opportunity in this space as people to connect to one another in an authentic way, which I do think solves one of the biggest problems of our world. And it's not just the loneliness that comes after grief, it is the loneliness that feels like it's um, uh, inherent inside of all of us. I heard somebody once say, the problem of the next 20 years isn't going to be about artificial intelligence. It's going to be artificial intimacy. People that are terribly lonely and have just resolved themselves to do whatever they can to numb themselves of that. And I think we'll find that people will be less whole humans. Um, so I'm on a little bit of a project. Uh, it's become a little more clear. Um, it is something that is not mental health related. And this is one thing that I will say. I do a whole lot of work in the grief space and all of that. And sometimes people don't know how to categorize what I do. So they'll by default say, I'm a grief therapist, and I will correct them. And I say, I am not. I do not have the licenses. I do not have the credentials. I do not have the particular knowledge. I do not want to cosplay as a therapist. There is work and knowledge and expertise that I do not have, and that is not my goal. Um, in the work that I do, I don't even want to compete with therapists. I want to complement and complete their work, right? I think that my unique burden and calling is towards a project that I'm starting to call human wholeness. And it has to do with health as it relates to us, mind, body, and soul, and grief as a language is an on ramp to this, right? Trying to create the kind of world, or for right now, create the kind of space where people can linger in their imperfections and frustrations and their insecurities long enough to really get to the bottom of what it is that bothers them. And at that bottom, they would realize that they're not alone. You would realize that you're not alone. I would realize that I'm not alone. That we would realize that there is no way uh, to rush anybody towards hope. Hope is never hurried. Um, and when you do try to hurry hope and rush hope, it's not that the words that you say are untrue. It's that the words that you say are under true, right? And this is what I mean. Have you ever seen a overeager person on the grill cooking chicken, and they're so eager to get it out that they rush through this and they serve people all types of uh, uh, chicken that's not uncooked? It is just undercooked. And when people intake undercooked chicken, you end up doing them more harm than good. And you just find that you can't rush chicken in the same way that you can't rush hope. You just got to sit there long enough for everybody to go through their process. It's the same with grief. We got to be patient and give people like long enough to be themselves, to discover themselves, to become themselves, right? The real problem of grief, your biggest problem when it comes to grief, is not what you think that it is. And that's your biggest problem. Your biggest problem when it comes to grief is not the loss, it is the loneliness. And we desperately need not somebody to turn the lights on, but somebody to just be with us. I tell the story all the time. Last one, and I'm out because, or yeah, last one and I'm out because I do have to get this up. What you find is that I used to say that my daughter was scared of the dark. And the reason why I said it is because she would have these terrible nightmares, and she would get up out of her bed. She'd sprint down the hallway into our room. She would bypass her mom en route to me. And she would say, "Daddy, can I snuggle with you in your bed?" And I say, "Sweetheart, of course you can." So she comes in, and it's cute for all of about 15 seconds. And then after 90 minutes of getting kicked in the back and the throat, we say, "You got to get out of the bed. You got to go back to your room." And she walks down the hallway to go to her room. And she always says two things: a statement and a request. The statement is unshocking, but the request gets me every time. She says, "But daddy, I'm scared of the dark." I say, "I know you're scared of the dark. And, what do you need, sweetheart?" And the request, she says, "Dad, will you hold my hand and walk me back to my room?" Do you know what she never says? She never asks me to turn the lights on. I think it's because she knows she is not scared of the dark hallway. She's scared of being alone in the dark hallway. I used to say my daughter was scared of the dark, but now I say my daughter's scared of being alone in the dark. Um, she realized that her biggest problem wasn't what she thought it was. It wasn't the dark hallway. It was being by herself in that dark hallway. When it comes to your grief, I don't think your biggest problem is the dark hallway of grief. I think your biggest problem is the despair that you feel when you feel like you're alone in that hallway. And um, as humans and people, grief is the one emotion that will touch us all. And so, if anything, I just hope that you leave today and you realize that whatever you're grieving, the death of a loved one, yeah, from the death of a loved one to the death of a relationship, right? From the death of a, grandparent to the death of a job or expectations or dreams or pet. Your grief is a right and natural response to a significant loss. And wherever you are, I just want you to know that you are not crazy. You are not alone. You're human. Until next time, peace.